gentlemen. We're going to have a look at what the journal was like 100 years ago. So this is a very crude and very brief timeline, because we're going back to 1917, when there was a break between the UK branch of the International Association and the rest of them. One can imagine, as we try to illustrate in that little vignette at the beginning of the meeting, quite why that happened. What it did was to create a new society and an associated journal, and in fact out of all that came the creation of the International Union, of which the first president was Alfred Seymour Jones. And we'll mention him once or twice this afternoon. What I've done is to briefly look through the first 6 months. It was going to be the first year, but I thought, oh, blimey, that's just a bit too much. But you just want to get a feel for what it was like, what changed when the schism occurred, and how does it compare with today's journal. Okay, so this is the last London edition of Collegium. So we've got some examples. I've tried to categorize whatever was in there either as a paper, in this case these are all papers, or they're notes or abstracts. When they're abstracts, they're really quite extensive abstracts. But there's some interesting ones to start with. Talking about formic acid and mercury as a suitable treatment for sterilizing and curing. Could go back to that. I would draw your attention to the remarks from Seymour Jones, directed at our American cousins. Well, we won't belabor that point. And of course, he has taken account of the fact that some eyebrows may be raised at the nature of the materials. But he's being a bit pragmatic. What do we care about guinea pigs? And that's the rest of the Collegium. One thing that you will notice immediately is that, as an example, this piece here from John Arthur Wilson, the very eminent American leather chemist, translated into French. More of that later. So that's the last London issue. So we go on to July. This is the break had occurred and the new society had been created, and you'll see that the first editor was Henry Proctor, that we would perhaps regard as the father of leather science. Occasionally I put little remarks in green, and there's an interesting one from Hugh Garner Bennett. His name will crop up once or twice, and here he's having a go at Wilson and McCandlish. It's a bit brave, isn't it? We all know about Wilson. His name lives on. Some of you may have heard of McCandlish. I doubt many people have heard of Hugh Garner Bennett. However, he will crop up again. So that's essentially what was in that first issue. The notes, 3 papers, and 21 abstracts. I've summarized for each issue the number of abstracts, because that is actually quite a large proportion of the content. So, on to August. There's another paper from Wilson, translated into French. There are one or two papers that refer to sol and gel chemistry because that's seemed to be at the heart of the thinking of the mechanism of veg tanning. And as you'll see, the content tends to be dominated by veg tanning. And I'll come back to that. I would point out the ENA paper. It's depending on how you look at it, it's either a good example or a bad example of the type of material that's been published. And it's discursive, and it's personal assertion, and it's what the chap thinks. In this case, this was pretty self-serving, and there was some comeback. Go on to September. Let me deal with that first item, the book chapter. This is the first of, in this run of a few months, there are 4 chapters created by Alfred Seymour Jones. And they're stated to be preparation for publishing as a book. What I'll do here is to draw your attention to this. The book chapters are absolutely full of photomicrographs. This, as you see quite clearly, is a photomicrograph of rawhide. It's one of his. It's an original. It's signed by him. His autograph is down at the bottom there. This must be a little over 100 years old. And therefore, as far as our department is concerned, really quite precious. Here we have actually a mention of chromium. There'll be 1 or 2 items like this that mention chrome, but here clearly chrome is subordinate in importance to veg tanning. You can also see a short note from one of the comments from Seymour Jones referring to the fact that he doesn't think that there's likely to be much money to be made from inventions in the leather industry, but if there's anything that seems half decent, then don't talk about it. Okay. October, not much of interest, still dominated by veg tanning. The interesting little paper there about pyrophosphate tannage. And of course, you can use polyphosphate as a preparative process for example, for veg tanning. Here, rather curiously, it's talking about complexation between aluminium and phosphate to form some sort of, goodness knows, you tell me, some sort of masking of the fiber structure. I really can't fathom that. Completing October is an interesting paper. It looks like we're beginning to get a little bit of science, and there's this paper from Pickles talking about the creation of a reagent for unhairing. Except when you look at it, there's absolutely no understanding of the unhairing process, and 2 of the assertions that are made are actually completely wrong. Hydrosulfide is not the unhairing agent, it's sulfide. And he asserts that polysulfide is advantageous. Actually, it doesn't make a blind bit of difference. You'll note some comeback from Pickles, claiming that this ENA paper is a load of nonsense, and he actually invented this process and wasn't referenced. And we see some chemistry about chromium beginning to appear. So there's the electrolyte study from Wilson, and McCandlish has a paper about analysing chrome liquors. Those of you who are familiar with the art will know about the McCandlish method of determining basicity. And if you've done that, the hot titration, God, Bennett, it's awful. And probably completely inaccurate. Anyway. November. Now these are really good examples, or bad examples, of terrible writing. There's Hugh Garner-Bennett, who's discussing, not reporting experimentation, he's discussing what he thinks. So it's all opinion. There's an even worse one, and that is the Barker and Barker paper of concerning basicity change. You read through it, and at the end you haven't a clue what they've done, why they've done it, and what it means. It's brilliant. And then there's the first mention from Lamb, who is very important in the scheme of things in terms of developing the society, and that is perhaps an unusual attention to recycling. Of course, at the time they had rather a lot of used boots. December. Back to Hugh Garner-Bennett. Now he's being pretty brave because he's going up against Wilson, because Wilson had published that there was a significant and fundamental difference between vegetable tanning and chrome tanning. And of course, we know that there clearly is. I mean, the chemistry is chalk and cheese, or veg chrome. So they were fundamentally different. Hugh Garner-Bennett, oh no, it's all the same stuff. But it's interesting that he himself has written that in this exposition, it's a discussion. It's polemical rather than experimental. This is hardly the scientific method. You note the note about chrome source, so it's clearly indicating the continued use of chromium-6 compounds. I suspect that's more to do with the use of dichromate to make trivalent chromium tanning salts for a one-bath process rather than the use of the two-bath process, which will come perhaps 10 years later. So, how can we summarize what have I observed? Well, it hasn't really changed in that those first 6 months is pretty much what you got before in palladium. And none of it is based on experimentation. So you'd probably characterize that as review, but in modern terms, review would be a lot of references that you would discuss, you would make sense of, but this is all purely qualitative stuff. It's gut reaction. We're still dominated by UK workers, although there is quite a lot being taken from America and still material being published from Europe. A lot of the content is actually abstract. You have noted the number of abstracts. Could be up in 20, 30 abstracts. And in this case, it's not rather different to the abstracts that you would see at the back of JSLTC, where it would be, what, quarter of a column a whole column would be an extremely long abstract. Some of these abstracts are pages. So it's a serious amount of text. C'est tout à fait clair que l'état dans le patient, monsieur, de comprendre la langue française. Est-ce qu'on peut supposer c'est la même chose aujourd'hui? Malheureusement, je crois que non. Dommage. With apologies, Michel. What is interesting is that they often take papers from one issue and then a couple of issues later they get recycled as really long abstracts. A very peculiar way of doing things, but it happened time and time again as I looked through the issues. You'll have got the impression, even from this very short review, that disputes, arguments, disagreements were relatively common. And of course, that's been a continuing feature of the leather literature. For example, you have the legendary disputes between Gustafson and Shuttleworth. So it is a tradition. In fact, there's even one researcher who's had a go at me. The content was not dominated by one aspect of the subject or the other. It seemed to be fairly evenly split between technology and science. Let's make a short comparison with what the journal is like now. It is fairly clear that there is a lot of technology published in 1917. Nowadays, it's moved clearly over to science. You do any analysis of JIALTC and JSLTC, and you'll see that it's dominated by science rather than technology. And of course, nowadays we have an accepted formatted structure in terms of how we create an argument. And paramount in that is referencing. Students take note. We're peer-reviewed. There is absolutely no evidence of any peer reviewing in the issues of 1917. If there were, then much of it would have been chucked out. Papers nowadays in JSLTC are short, much shorter than they were, for example, in the middle of the century. So nowadays you would say that they're more like communications than papers, but not as short as the notes in 1917. And we're dominated in JSLTC today with Chinese papers. And of course we offer abstracts in Chinese. An interesting comparison with JIALTC, they're dominated by Indian publications, almost exclusively in the way that we're dominated by Chinese publications. Slightly peculiar. So, what can we conclude? It's interesting, I find it very interesting that it's absolutely coincidental that the period that we're talking about is the period when there was a technological revolution. The switch over from veg to chrome. And what you see is exactly how that is happening. And the journal is reflecting what's going on in terms of what they're publishing. A lot of technological stuff, and there is a gradual shift from veg tanning domination to chrome tanning domination. But of course, as far as we're concerned, change was coming. The change from the discursive type of science, which really is a throwback to the 19th and the 18th century of the gentleman scientists, into the more technical, rigid structure that we're familiar with as the scientific method. So all those polemical discussions are going to disappear into what we now know as technical writing. And we started out by regarding the schism between the societies, but of course, that was never going to last. And I'd just like to acknowledge the debt that we owe to those people who saw fit to make the break, to create our society, which eventually turned into ICLTC. And I'll mention, Proctor's been mentioned already, Seymour Jones, I've given him a lot of build-up, and Lamb was another seminal character. At the beginning of the day, it was pointed out by Steve what was going on at the time of the schism, and we should never make light of that. So I'll leave you with this image and those words.